Hello and welcome everybody. I am Paul Chian, joined here by Team Channel Firewall member and Hall of Famer Paulo Vitor Damo da Rosa. Good to have you here. And today we're going to be talking about the deck I was actually most excited to see coming into this tournament in a Reservoir combo. Now, why this deck?
Well, we think it's a pretty good deck, and it's very good against all the controlling strategies, like Grixis control, blue-white control, Turbo Fog. If people aren't pressuring you at all, you basically cannot lose. So, and I think you're not great against the aggressive strategies, but you have game against them at least. So it's a deck where you have a lot of very good matchups that you almost can't lose, and then some matchups where you're slightly unfavored, which seemed like a good place to be.
Okay, so going into the tournament, a lot of people kind of expected a lot of Chain Whirler decks and Mono Green Stompy. How does your deck fare against those decks?
I think Mono Green Stompy is your worst matchup because Steel Leaf Champion is so hard to block, and then Ronas and Gauta have Trample and Give Trample. But it's still not a disaster, you know. You're like 45%, and the more cards you play in the main, the better you are. Like I play 2 cards to Reservoir, some people play 4 cards, so then you're better in that matchup. Black-Red, I think you're favored in game 1, and then slightly unfavored in game 2, but I think you're more favored game 1 than you are unfavored in game 2. So I think it's about even-ish.
So that's really interesting. You know, most people, when they come into big tournaments, they know what the top decks are, and then they choose to try to play a strategy that beats those decks. You kind of opted for a deck that has okay matchups against those, but kind of good against the rest of the field.
Yeah, that was kind of a miss in the regard. I think people played it a bit safer than they normally would in a normal event because you don't want to be the person sinking the ship for your team.
Right.
You know, so we had a lot more. We have 40% Black-Red. I don't think in an individual tournament we'd see 40% Black-Red.
Right.
But yeah, I think it still works. You know, I don't think you are horrible against those decks, and I would rather play Mono Blue against Black-Red than the Black-Red Mirror. Okay. So whatever, even if you do choose one of those dominating strategies, you're still only having a 50-50 against those top decks, right? Because you're playing the same deck they are. So in that regard.
Of course. All right, so let's just hop straight into the deck here, starting out with, I guess, some of our win conditions here. 4 copies of Scion Master Thopterist, 2 copies of Aetherflux Reservoir, and Karn, Scion of Urza. Yeah,
the deck is an Aetherflux Reservoir deck in game 1 at least, so this is how you win most of your games. The idea is to play Reservoir and then play a bunch of cheap artifacts, gaining a bunch of life, and then returning them all to your hand and replaying them again. And then it's not that hard to deal 50 damage to someone. You know, if you play 9 artifacts, you already gain 45 life, or 9 spells rather. So that's usually enough. And I've had games in practice where my opponent had a Gideon emblem, so I just dealt 50 to Gideon and 50 to them in the same turn. So it scales really, really well. So this is usually how you win. But you do win games with Sai and Karn in game 1 as well, but mostly Reservoir.
So this is kind of the primary way to actually kill people.
Yeah, and it's actually really good against red decks. Like the people who play more Karns and don't play as many Reservoirs have a lot of trouble with black red and with fast red decks. But because we're playing 2, sometimes you just go turn 4 Reservoir, and then you gain enough life every turn for the rest of the game. So to stall it long enough for you to combo them.
Now talk to us a little bit about Sai. This is kind of the newest edition. There was some paradoxical outcome decks that existed in the past, but with the addition of this, it seems like this has kind of made this into, you know, potentially a tier 1 deck.
Yeah, I think Sai is excellent in the deck. It isn't necessarily part of the combo. You know, if you're playing Reservoir and bouncing artifacts, it doesn't do anything to help with that. But it just makes it so that when you don't have the combo going on, you can still win. It turns on Mox Ember, so that gives you mana. It gives you plenty of artifacts, so you can flash back, you know, commit to memory, Aftermath, and you're still up a lot of mana. It lets you pressure Planeswalkers. It gives you a threat so that your opponent has to react. It even draws cards. So it does a lot of things that are important to the deck. I don't think the deck could exist without it.
Yeah, it basically does everything, it sounds like.
It does, yeah.
And what about Karn here?
Well, Karn is more, I don't think Karn is that good, but against some people it's very good. For example, against Mono Green, you play a Karn, you make a 6/6, then, well, now they already have trouble attacking you. Like Steel Leaf Champion doesn't get through anymore, and the other creatures you can block with your tokens. Sometimes Karn tokens even outgrow Gauta, for example, because you, like, if you have Sai, for each artifact that you play, you get an extra 1. So it's not that hard to have, you know, a 15/15. And it costs 0 with Statuary. It's a colorless card, but it's not an artifact. So you can improvise it into play, and you can also bounce it with Alchemy. So sometimes you just, you know, you tap 4 artifacts, you play Karn, you make a construct, you bounce it to your hand, you tap 4 artifacts, and you play it again, you make another construct. So it's not rare that you just, you know, pass the turn with 3 Tantems in play or something.
Oh, wow. Okay, so speaking of Statuary, let's move on to this next slide here. We've got a couple of metal spinners, Puzzle Knot, 1 Glintnest Crane, Statuary, and Paradoxical Outcome. Let's talk about these cards.
Yeah, Inspiring Statuary is also, you know, part of the combo in the sense that you don't have that many spells that it plays, but everything that it does play is expensive. So it lets you go, it lets you play Paradox Outcome for 1 mana, and if I have Mox Amber inside, that effectively costs 0 because you bounce the Mox, you replay it. And then it lets you cast Commit to Memory. This is a very good, you'll see it later, but a very good part of this deck is that it can cast Memory for value. And almost every Commit Memory deck is using it for the commit part. And we're actually using it for the memory part, because when you have 20 lands in play, or effectively, because your artifacts counts are lands, then drawing 7 cards is really good. And Paradoxical Outcome is also part of the combo, in the sense that sometimes you Paradoxical Outcome for 7 or 8 and you win the game off of that. But it's also not rare that your opponent attacks, you block 2 creatures before the Thopter and Glistening Crane, then you outcome, bring those 2 back to your hand and a Prism, and then since the Crane and the Prism replace themselves, you're actually up 4 cards. So it's also a value mid-game kind of thing, while also being a combo.
So like turn 4, you can just play this to draw 3 or 4 cards? Like that's just a common thing you do?
Yeah, that's a very common play pattern. Okay. Or sometimes you have Karn, they attack Karn with like 3 creatures because they have to make sure it dies. You just play this, you bounce Karn to your hand.
Sure.
And then their attack is fogged.
So talk to us about like the singular copy of the Glistening Crane here. What's up with that one?
Well, I wanted to play more, but I couldn't fit them, so I could only fit what is really scientific.
61.
Yeah, I'm never going to do that. That's an impersonator if I ever show up with 61.
Okay. Yeah.
But yeah, basically, I think it's actually fine against other decks too. That's the thing that we found out. Normally, Crane is only good against aggressive decks, but it's good against Grixis too, because it helps you block Chain Wheeler.
Right.
So, sorry, not Chain Wheeler, Siphoner, Glistening Siphoner.
Yeah.
So if they go Siphoner, you go Crane or Thopter, or Psy Crane, then they already can't attack you.
Okay.
So we actually board those Zoom against Grixis.
Sure.
But yeah, it's just a fine card in the deck. It's very good with Outcome because you bounce it. But we just didn't have room for more. Everything is too important.
So you found that the Metal Spinner's Puzzle Knot is more important than the Crane, just as kind of redundancy for card draw?
Yeah. Also, if you start cutting Puzzle Knots for Cranes, then all of a sudden you're more likely to miss, so your Cranes get worse.
Sure.
So you can't really cut a non-artifact for Crane.
All right, you got to get that ratio right. All right, moving on here, we have our cheap spells. We have 4 copies of Ornithopter, Mox Amber, which is kind of the first deck we've seen with Mox Amber. There was a lot of hype for this one. 4 copies of Renegade Map and Prophetic Prism.
Yeah, those are the artifacts that you like to bounce when you're playing Outcome, because they're very cheap or they cost 0. They give you something when they come into play.
Right.
Ornithopter in particular is a card that is very good in the deck. And at first we were siding it out against a lot of people like Grixis. And then we found out we're actually making our decks worse by siding it out. Because it was very important to just have something in play when you're casting Outcome.
Right.
And it just works with your deck so well.
Right.
Like if you have Psy, that's it adds 2 artifacts to the board, which is 2 mana when you have Statuary. So it's a bad card, but it does so much in the deck that it's worth it.
It's just so important to have a critical mass of cheap artifacts in your deck. And I imagine oftentimes you even like sandbag this if you have like a Psy in hand, right?
Oh, basically always.
Okay.
I mean, unless you have to block that turn, you sandbag them for Psy or Reservoir.
Okay, makes a lot of sense. All right, moving on here, we have our few, not a lot, but we have some interactive spells here. We have 3 copies of Metallic Rebuke, 2 Baral's Expertise, and 2 Commit to Memories.
Yeah, this is your interaction. Depending on what you're playing against, it's used to buy time or to protect your own cards. For example, if you're playing against blue-white, then you can play a card and a Rebuke in the same turn because it's so cheap. Baral's Expertise is also this mix of combo piece plus interaction. Sometimes you just play a turn 4 or 5 Baral's Expertise, bounce some of your opponent's things, and play a card, for example, or an Outcome. And if you're mid-combo, you can play Expertise, you can bounce your own things, and then you replay them and you actually net mana in the process. So one of the good things about this deck is that a lot of the cards, they work as part of the combo, but they're not useless in the middle of the game.
Okay. And this actually counts as an extra spell that you're casting, right? With the Aetherflux Reservoir?
Yeah, and with Psy.
Okay.
So you get,
And typically, Commit to Memory, this is a nice interactive spell, but it's kind of expensive. But as you mentioned before, with the Inspiring Statuary, you can actually oftentimes play this for nearly free, right?
Yeah, and casting Memory, you both draw 7 cards, so you're not getting a big edge there.
Right.
But you have 12 effective mana to work with, and your opponent has 6. So you just overpower them at that point.
So you just kind of play this to kind of just try to finish off your opponent that turn.
Yes.
Often. Okay. All right, moving on, we have our mana base. So we have a lot of colorless lands because, of course, this is a mono-color deck. We have 4 copies of Zalfin Void, Inventor's Fair, Arch, Scavenger Grounds, and Islands. So this is the card I kind of want to talk about a little bit. We got a Scryland again. Yeah. What are your thoughts on this card?
I mean, this is the best land by a lot. We were talking with Siggy, my teammate, and at some point he was like, how about we cut a Zalfin Void? And I said, Siggy, if I could, I would play 10. And I literally would. You know,
Right.
it is so good in the deck. There's basically no downside. You're a monocolor deck. You have 4 Renegade maps, 4 Prisms. You don't even have a lot of blue cards in it.
Right.
So most lists on Magic Online play, you know, 4-1 and the rest islands. We felt like we could afford at least 2 more colorless lands.
Yeah, and that's why you guys also chose to add these 2 to your deck, right?
Yeah, we had a version that had black, and Sam Black had 6 swamps in it, and he wasn't even having mana problems. So, like, it's possible that you can even afford more colorless lands. The
Right.
problem is that past the first 2, they're kind of bad.
Sure.
You know, you almost never activate them, but if they're basically free. Inventor's Fair is okay, but it's legendary, so you don't want to draw 2.
Okay, so I mean, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, it's just really exciting to see this actually be playing in some kind of a combo deck. So there you have it. That was Reservoir combo. We're gonna be taking a short break, but right after, we will have more Magic for you here at Pro Tour 25th anniversary.